Design shapes the way you live. I'm Nico, an interior design expert focused on the connection between home and well-being. Using science, design, and professional expertise, I'll help you shape a space that elevates your mindset and enhances your well-being. Let's create space for better living, starting now. Today's episode is a little different. This is my first episode of 2026, and instead of doing a recap of the year that just ended, I want to start this year by slowing things down and talking about simplifying. In this episode, we're going to reflect on what we're carrying forward, what supported us, what weighed on us, and what quietly asked for attention in our homes. We'll talk about simplifying not just our spaces, but our projects, our pace, and the way we make decisions at home. I'll share why repairing before replacing can change how a home feels, how involving your household can reduce tension and mental load, and how simplifying your decor can help meaningful things come into focus. We'll also talk about where it's worth slowing down and investing in things that last, things that ground a space, and why rushing design decisions often works against us. And throughout this episode, I'll come back to a small moment that's been sitting with me, a quiet video of a furniture maker at work. It wasn't fast, it wasn't loud, but it felt like a reminder of how I want to approach home and life this year. At Pero, we believe our homes are tools for better living, and sometimes the most meaningful change doesn't come from doing more, but from slowing down enough to do things well. So I want to start with something I mentioned in the intro of this episode. So I recently watched a short video of a furniture maker restoring an old chair, slowly, carefully nailing fabric into place. The chair was an antique piece of wood, and it was a close-up of this furniture maker's hands as he was placing the fabric and nailing it into place. And what struck me wasn't the chair, it was the pace, the repetition, the quiet focus on doing one thing well. How rare it feels to watch someone work without rushing. It's not about immediate gratification. Slowing down helps us make better decisions. Presence changes outcomes. Longevity is really built through care and not through speed. And I was just watching and thinking about how this video relates to life and what I want for 2026. And some of the things that came to mind were attention to detail, taking time, mastery, longevity, tradition, process, presence, things like restraint and respect for materials. Also, things like intentionality, right? Every step has a reason and nothing is accidental. Focus, one task at a time, which produces better results. Commitment, finishing well is just as important as starting. And stewardship, you're responsible for something that's meant to last. And that chair didn't need to be new. It just needed to be cared for. It needed the touch. It needed vision. It needed excellence. And I think our homes and our lives are asking for the same. So often at the beginning of the year, we want to rush towards change. We want to get going on our goals. We feel inspired. So change is something that's a part of that momentum. But before we can really change anything, we need to pause, we need to reflect, and we need to notice. And that's especially true in our homes. When we focus on goals in our personal lives, we do tend to think action needs to happen right away. And we can often look back on past years and think about things in a negative light. We didn't accomplish that, or we wanted that to be different. So we set our goals often based on things that we maybe fell short on. And I think when we're looking at our homes in a new year, we have to frame it as an opportunity to better our life. We have to think of it in a way where we reflect, we look back, but we get excited about what's ahead and not look back in a negative way or in any sort of negative light, but just really in a curious light. We need to get curious about some of the things that we'd like to see different in our homes, or the ways that we can use our home as a tool for better living in the new year. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and I want you to really think about your experience in this past year, your experience right now. And the first one is, when you think about the spaces in your home, which ones feel heavy? Which ones feel unfinished? Or are there any that you're quietly avoiding? Are there any that feel stagnant? I talk about how when a room feels stagnant, it almost looks like it's unchanged. There's no life in the room. And this doesn't have to be an entire room. This could be a corner. And I often compare it to what stagnant water looks like. So when you see stagnant water, it's not moving, it's not running, there's murky, it's perhaps is muddy, not clean. You might not be able to see a reflection on the surface of the water. Like, it just feels really lifeless. And that's sort of often what rooms can do when we're quietly avoiding them or when they're unfinished. We leave them, we let them be. And so instead of taking care of them or, rearranging them or cleaning them even, we leave them. And then they become sort of more stagnant. So are there any areas in your home that give you that feeling when you think about it? When things are left unfinished in a space, or when a room feels, it's not uplifting, it feels heavy. When you're avoiding a room for whatever reason, it could be because the function of the room hasn't been addressed, the clearances have been overlooked. It could just be that it's outdated and it's having an impact on you in that way. But when this happens, things in our bodies begin to happen. So you could experience just like delays. And when this happens, there are things that happen as a result. And that can be micro delays in time in your day from just digging for things. You're spending time looking for things, or even just spending micro amounts of time having to navigate around things because the flow isn't right. It could be that you're bumping elbows because your clearances aren't okay and you're not even really aware, but in the bathroom in the morning or the kitchen at night, there's several people in that space and you're bumping elbows. It doesn't feel easy. It feels restricted. It feels a little stressful. It could be that there's no place to set things down. So, you don't have enough counter space somewhere, which is just a constant irritation. It could be that things are outdated. So you might have a dripping faucet, which, if you've got a dripping faucet, say in your bathroom, that could lead to fragmented sleep, because even though you're not consciously aware of it, your brain is registering that noise, and sounds can trigger a mild stress response. So there's all sorts of things that can be happening as a result of your spaces feeling unfinished, or areas that you're avoiding because things are outdated or you don't have the space that you need. So I want you to think about those rooms, and then where did your home support you more than you realized? So if you think back to some moments where things were really great, maybe you were doing well at work, you were on top of your schedule, you felt like you were on top of just your household chores, maybe you had some projects that you completed within the home. Like all of these things, those moments where things were great. What state was the house in? What state were you in? How did you function in your home in that time? And if your home reflected your pace lately, what would it say? What would your home say? I know my home at the end of 2025 probably would have reflected a very sort of tired way, because the pace of life for us in our home at the end of the year was really, really fast. And I think that our home would have said, slow down. And, so once we see what's been weighing on us, the next step isn't to overhaul, it's to care for what's already there. So one of the most grounding ways to simplify a home is through repair. It's amazing how in a home, how many things need maintenance. They need care and attention. The other day, I was walking to my front door and we had been so busy coming through the Christmas season. And I noticed that just the front door, it was dirty. Like it needed a wipe down. We've had a lot of rain. We've had a lot of muck. And just walking up to the front door, I just noticed, wow, I haven't taken the time lately to just give it a wipe and make it look, sweep the front step. And that's okay. But it's amazing how after I did that, how good it felt and how fresh it felt. And I think that it's those little things that we can overlook and we don't recognize how important and how impactful it can be on us. So, and that's just one small example. There are so many things within a home that needs that maintenance, that needs that care. Simple things like a doorknob that doesn't work anymore, or, a window that doesn't close properly, or a light bulb that's out in a room. All of these little things that, are constant, really. The home is sort of always evolving and it always needs attention and it always needs thought. And I think that it can happen often where these things get overlooked, but they weigh on us. So repair, just go around your home and write down a bunch of the stuff that needs to be done. Even if it's as simple as replacing a light bulb, jot it down and start thinking about when you want to repair these things. Look at the small broken things that you've really learned to live with. We have to think about any little unfinished repairs, the stress that they can create in the background. In our subconscious mind, we are aware that those repairs need to happen. And it's almost like if you can frame it in a way that's like small repairs kind of build trust. They build a little something between you and your home, right? You're giving it that care. You're paying attention to it. And then in turn, you have a reward from that as well. So the emotional relief of just closing open loops and crossing things off your list. It doesn't matter how big or how small. If it's a big to do, a big repair, then that might take a little more planning. But even just planning and sitting down and thinking it through and coming up with that plan is really, really beneficial to you. And you'll feel such a difference if you do that. So whether it's a small repair or a big repair, just jot it down, start the planning, and then really start tackling that and crossing things off that list. And most homes aren't lived in alone. Simplification works at its best when it's shared. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to simplify together. And this can be done through a family meeting, because a simplified home isn't just about one person controlling the list. It's about clarity, really, for everyone. And one thing I've noticed both personally and in clients' homes is that a lot of the stress in a house doesn't actually come from the space itself. It comes from what's unspoken. So sure, the space might not be working. The space can be updated. It can be fully changed. But what are the unspoken needs of each person within the space? Usually there's one person that's sort of carrying the mental load of the house. They're noticing really what's not working. They're seeing what needs to be updated and changed. And they're often holding that list in their head. And everyone else is just kind of going along with it. Of course, they're responding to their spaces, but it can often be just one person that's really carrying that kind of mental design load. So when I talk about simplifying together, I'm really talking about creating space for conversation, not a crazy sit down. It doesn't have to be, you don't do this, or let's do this, or why aren't we blah, blah, blah. Like, it doesn't have to be that sort of conversation. It's really just a moment to connect, a moment to ask, hey, what's not working right now? And what feels stressful for you in the house? And what do we actually need support with? And this is such a great time to do at the beginning of a year, because you're allowed to address it, and you can say, and this isn't a judgy moment. This is really just coming together and saying, well, let's talk honestly and openly about what's not working, what we'd like to see change in our home. And then you can plan moving forward of how that can roll out and what that looks like. It could be about clutter, or it could be about schedules. You could look at the unfinished project that really nobody wants to claim. So maybe you need to outsource that and have, hire somebody to come in and do that. And that's going to take planning, and that's going to take saving. Sometimes it's as simple as realizing that no one feels responsible for a space. So it then slowly becomes that problem area. It becomes that catch-all. And then it sort of evolves and changes, and it doesn't have a style. It doesn't have a look. It doesn't have a function. It's this overlapping area. And then it can often be a dumping ground, right? Oh, just put it in that room, or put that in that room, or, oh, we don't want that chair anymore, pop it back in that room. What I always encourage is letting go of perfection here, right? You don't have to redesign your entire life. You're just agreeing really on what would feel better. And what would feel like progress in the next few months? What could you actually tackle together, and what expectations need to shift? Because when responsibility is shared, something really important happens. The home stops feeling like that source of tension, and it starts feeling like a place that's actually supporting the people in it. So once things start to quiet down, and you have a plan visually and emotionally, you begin to notice something. The right things stand out. When a home is busy, everything competes for attention, right? Nothing really lands, and that can feel surprisingly exhausting. But when you simplify, when you remove a bit of visual noise from a space, what matters becomes clearer. It's almost like when you get rid of all of your Christmas decorations. You put things away after Christmas, and sure, if you're somebody like myself who loves Christmas, then it's kind of met with a bit of angst. You're like, oh, Christmas is over. But when you do kind of simplify and you remove everything, and everything gets put back, and you clean the room and you rearrange it back to what it was, the Christmas tree's gone, so that space is filled with whatever was there before, maybe a chair, that room feels clear. It feels really good all of a sudden, because you notice the things that matter once again. And that could be a focal point in the room, maybe the piece of art that you moved off the mantle to make way for your greenery or your stockings or whatever it is. But you start to notice which pieces actually ground the space, which you feel what grounds you in the room, which objects carry story, which things you feel connected to. And at Pero, storytelling in interiors is a big pillar for us. We believe our homes should reflect lived experiences, not just style, right? Old pieces, things passed down with a patina, objects that you've collected slowly. These tend to hold more weight than things bought quickly to fill a space, things that look really new. And don't get me wrong, I love some new things, but it's a blend, it's a mix. You can, get something new and pair it with something that's storied. And sometimes simplifying isn't about getting rid of everything. I think some people can think, well, I just need to purge, especially when it's a new year. But it's about giving the right things room to breathe. So getting rid of the things that are bogging the space down, that aren't speaking to the room, and then filling it or keeping the things that you really want to highlight and then giving them that room to breathe. Negative space matters. It gives your eye somewhere to rest, to land, and it really helps the mind calm down. So a good question to ask is, what does my home currently highlight? And is that what I want to be most visible in my daily life as I move from room to room? Because when everything else steps back, the pieces that remain start to feel more intentional and more meaningful. So once you've simplified and created some breathing room, it becomes a lot easier to see where it's actually worth investing. Simplifying doesn't mean cutting back on quality. It means being intentional about where you put your time, your money, and your energy. And I often see people spread themselves thin, buying lots of smaller things that never really settle the space. But when you invest in the right elements, a room really starts to feel grounded. You can do this with things like built-ins or millwork, which can do so much for a room in a home. They add structure, they create storage where it's actually needed, and they make a space feel finished in a way that furniture alone often doesn't. I especially love millwork around doorways and transitions. These are the moments we move through every single day. And when they're treated with care, they quietly elevate the entire experience of the home. Those details that you find in millwork, the amount of like grounding that they can do to a space is amazing. It's immediately felt. If you walk into a room, and you've probably experienced this if you don't have built-in millwork in your home, but you've walked in somewhere, you felt that, in old homes, you often find built-ins, and it just adds permanence to a space. And you can really elevate it with different details. And this is where thinking long-term really matters. Designing for the next 10 years, not the next trend. When you invest in things with staying power, you actually reduce decision fatigue down the line. So you're helping yourself out. But, obviously it is an investment. Things like millwork, it's not inexpensive. This is something that takes planning and it takes saving, but it's well worth it if you can prioritize that over other things. And the goal isn't to do everything at once. It's to choose a few things that will really carry the space forward and let them do the heavy lifting. That kind of restraint creates calm, and it gives the rest of the home permission to feel simpler. And you can have fun with it too, adding lighting into millwork or painting the millwork a different color, going with two tones, mixing wood grains. You can really make it interesting. And then that restraint in other areas is important as well. There's one thing that can undo even the best intentions in design, and that is rushing. We're much more likely to make impulsive decisions when we're tired, when we're stressed, or when we want to change so badly that we rush to get that relief and to see that vision. And I think this shows up a lot in our homes, buying things quickly, starting projects before we're really ready, or settling because we just want something done. So back to that furniture video that I watched, he was carefully nailing fabric into place slowly, methodically, without any rush. You could tell that this wasn't work you do distracted or work you rush without paying for it later. And again, it just made me think about how often we hurry through decisions that actually deserve time. Furniture, renovations, scheduling our lives. And there's a difference between excitement and urgency. Excitement feels grounded, and urgency usually comes from stress. And when we slow down, when we think about the process, not just the outcome, we tend to choose better. We invest in things that last. We repair instead of replace. We stop buying things more than once. And that video stayed with me because it felt like a reminder. It felt like a nudge that good work takes time. And the reward isn't just a finished piece, it's knowing it was done well. So, as you move into this new year, I want to leave you with this idea. Simplifying your home isn't about doing less, it's about doing what matters with care. Reflect on what your home has been carrying, repair what's asking for attention, share the responsibility, give space to what holds meaning, and invest slowly in things that will last. When we slow down our spaces, we often slow down our lives, and that creates room for better living. If you want support with this, you can explore our free guides and resources over at yourparo.com. That's yourparo.com. And if you're starting 2026 here with me, thank you for being part of this conversation. I'm really looking forward to where we're headed next. Thanks so much for listening today. If you found this episode helpful, the best way to support the show is to follow along and share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can become one of our Better Living backers. It's a small monthly contribution that helps keep the show going. And as a thank you, I'll send you a personal note along with a 15% discount for the Create Space course when it launches. You can find the support the show link right in the show notes. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for creating space with me.